Please be seated. Thomas is sitting at the far end of the table. He's trying to follow what Jesus is saying, and Jesus has been going on for a while now. All mine are yours, and yours are mine, and I have been glorified in them. And now I'm no longer in the world, but they are in the world, and I'm coming to you. It's all really going over the pragmatic Thomas's head. Then Jesus takes some bread and tells them that this is my body, and whenever you eat it, do this in remembrance of me. And then he does the same with a cup of wine. Meanwhile, Peter, who thinks he's the top dog, gets called out for an upcoming betrayal. Peter is upset. And after that little bump with Peter, Judas and Jesus get into a heated conversation. Judas storms out. Now, Thomas had noticed that Judas was a little on edge the past few weeks. He assumed it was something to do with the group's money. You know, Thomas never really liked the big festivals and crowds because they made people act strange like this. Thomas starts to see the fractures forming in his group of friends. After dinner, they decide to go to a garden. Jesus asks them to stay awake with him. Thomas is tired. When he wakes up, Thomas's world begins to unravel. It all happens so suddenly. There are arrests, betrayals, trials, torture, and a public execution. And all these things Thomas is helpless and powerless to stop. The life, the world that Thomas had known for 3 years, gone in 3 days. After watching the crucifixion from afar, it's too much for Thomas. He wants to be alone, to shut out the world for a moment, get time to sort it all out. And he can't do that with Peter and the rest talking all the time. Of course, we don't know what actually was happening from Thomas's point of view during the Passion. The gospel record is silent on those details. All we know for sure, as we just heard in the gospel, is that Thomas wasn't there with the group the first night the resurrected Jesus appears to them. And when he hears about it, he asks a question that will forever give him the moniker, Doubting Thomas. Unless I see the mark of the nails in his hands and put my finger in the mark of the nails and my hand in his side, I will not believe. One statement labels him for centuries. What would you do if your entire world collapsed in a moment? There are many possible responses, but going off by yourself is a good candidate. There's a reasonable chance that after the crucifixion, Thomas went off by himself, doing whatever the first century equivalent of binge-watching Netflix shows and putting those incessant group chats on mute. He's ignoring the group's invitations to get back together. And so when he finally reconnects and hears this unbelievable event, saying, I don't believe it until I see it, well, we can understand that. That's not that unreasonable. All the disciples handled Christ's death differently, and we are like the disciples. We all make our way through the world differently, doing our best with what we have available to us. We might huddle with the group, locking the world out in fear, or we might try to go solo, try to figure things out on our own. Sometimes we mistake God for gardeners. We may have blind, unexamined faith, or we may have a double portion of skepticism. This second Sunday of Easter, wherever you are in your journey with God right now, whether it's faith or doubt, joy or sorrow, peaceful or disturbed, weary or rested, know that God is with you. God is with you right now, but sometimes we don't notice. Sometimes we have to ask God for what we need to notice his presence. When Thomas asks to see and feel the mark of the nails, Jesus responds by giving Thomas what he needs. Throughout these great 50 days of Easter, we will hear different stories of the resurrected Jesus appearing to his disciples, but they all have the same pattern. Jesus comes to the people where they are, in the midst of their day-to-day lives. Jesus comes to them. They don't recognize him at first. But when they do finally see Christ, their lives are transformed. Jesus comes to us in the gardens of grief and through locked doors of fear. Nothing can separate us from God. It could only have been God who was with Thomas those lonely days after the crucifixion, though Thomas did not recognize God's presence then. It was God who nudged him to reconnect with the group. It was in the group, in his community, that Thomas finally saw face to face the God that never left him. Thomas gives us a pattern for recognizing God in our own lives, seeing the resurrected Christ now. We ask for what we need to see God, and God always responds. Some of you may know about the Mar Thoma Church. It's a branch of Christianity that's mainly based out of India. Mar is a Syriac honorific, a title roughly equivalent to the English honorific title saint. And Thoma, well, in English we would say Thomas. Mar Thoma, Saint Thomas. And today our siblings in the Mar Thoma branch of Christianity are the chief inheritors of the great faith of the so-called doubting Thomas. You see, after he saw and touched the wounds of Christ, when he encountered the God that never left him, he took the good news he encountered that day beyond the walls of Jerusalem, beyond the edges of the Roman Empire, which was the known world for him, further than almost any other apostle, all the way to the southern tip of India. And that's a feat that can only be accomplished with the help of the Holy Spirit and a significant amount of faith. When we recognize Christ's presence among us, our lives are transformed. We encounter a life-giving spirit that wants to share and grow the good news of God's unconditional love for everyone. So maybe today you are rejoicing with the apostles in the upper room, but perhaps you are still at the foot of the cross. Maybe you have encountered the risen Christ recently in your own life and are filled with the Spirit. Or maybe you're still waiting to notice God and Christ in your life. No matter where you are, if you're joyous or fearful, doubtful or faithful, walking with the flock or straying away, God is